There's something about memory that is so powerful when it's triggered by things that aren't words, like smells, or in the case of today's oddcast, sounds.
We always have an odd one in the crowd.
So it's kind of odd.
Decidedly odd.
Doesn't that strike you as a little bit odd?
No, that doesn't strike me as a little bit odd.
It's the Bob and Sheri Oddcast. The stuff we wouldn't, couldn't, or shouldn't do on the regular show. Now, here's the Oddcast.
Hi, Sheri, Lamar, Max, Doc, and also Heather. This is my first time calling since Bob's retirement. I used to call all the time. This is Ron from Kentucky. I just listened to your podcast where you were talking about sounds of home. When I was growing up, my father was really, really into railroading, model railroading, and he was fascinated with actual railroads. We would travel to railroad yards all over the state of Pennsylvania and New Jersey. We even went to Horseshoe Curve a couple of times, and we got a house when I was in my teens. We got a house just outside, probably about 50 yards from a pair of train tracks that came up and down through the town. And my dad used to run out to the porch every time he heard a train whistle and watch the train come by. So fast forward to when I was 40 years old, and I moved 600 miles away to Kentucky, and I wound up living in a small town called Smith's Grove, where they just built a Buc-ee's, and half a mile from my house is a pair of train tracks. So 24 hours a day, I hear in the distance train whistles. And when I hear those train whistles, they remind me of my dad. So that's the blessing where I get a continuous sound of home just from where I'm living, here in Kentucky. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks a lot. Enjoy your show. Love listening to the podcast. And we'll smell you later.
Ron, I love that. I love that story. And I love that it's multi-layered, because it's not just about a sound that reminds you of home or being a kid, but it's a sound that reminds you of your dad, who sounds like a real character. Like I love when people have an intense fixation. And I love the sound of a train. You know, the one regret that I have is that I've never managed to live close enough to train tracks to be able to hear that. Now, my older brother and his wife do. And when I stay at their house, I always sleep in the top bunk of what used to be my niece's bedroom. And I open the window just a crack, because about a mile from their house is a train track. And a few times a night, starting at around 11 p.m., you'll hear it go by, and it's just close enough so that you can hear it and hear that mournful whistle, but just far enough away that it doesn't jar you out of sleep and scare you. You know what I mean? It's just that perfect distance. And there is something so evocative and mournful and poetic and American to me about the sound of a train going by and blowing its whistle.
For a majority of my life, I have lived near railroad tracks where I've been able to hear the train.
Lucky.
Not, and as you said, not close enough that I was, I was feeling the vibrations. And the one thing that I remember about train whistles when I was a kid is where we lived. If the train whistle was louder, it meant that it was going to storm almost every time. It just the way the sound carried for whatever reason with the weather conditions or anything else, that meant, it's going to storm. And you sort of knew it. Didn't have radar on my phone, sorry. The technology wasn't quite there yet.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what
cool.
about for you, Lamar? Because you had a pretty idyllic childhood in a lot of ways, living out on a farm in the country. What sounds like home to you? Think about that.
Yeah, think
and
about
we'll
it.
pause.
Oh. Yeah, it's idyllic when you're watching it on TV. Yeah, absolutely. Everybody.
Did you live right on the tracks? Is that why you say that?
No, I'm being on a farm. I mean, in the TV, everybody's got a twig in their mouth and they're walking around and smiling in overalls and eating lunch and all that. Me, I was pulling weeds out of the garden. It was, and feeding the cows and all that kind of stuff. But yeah. But living out in the country, there's nothing better. I wish the inconvenience of living out, it's nice to be able to get your stuff, but now that Family Dollar's alive, they're everywhere. So you can get to a Family Dollar, but no, the cool part was, we didn't have air conditioning in our house because we lived up on a hill, and we didn't have air conditioning in the house until I was probably in high school. But we would open the windows, and we had window fans, and we had a ceiling fan, but we slept with the windows open. And man, it between the crickets and the tree frogs and all that kind of stuff, yeah, that was nice. That was very nice. That was the best part about summertime. Although it might be a little bit hot, the windows open, hearing those
all those
sounds.
Summertime noises.
Yeah. Now, the sound that I had year round that always resonated with me in the middle of the night, when my daddy would be sitting up at the kitchen table drinking liquor and smoking cigarettes, he'd get to coughing and he'd wake me up, and he had that coughing like he had that coughing like he was dying. You know what I'm saying? He was like, like emphysema or something. I mean, and so he'd get coughing and he'd get that coughing straight. And then that's when I had about a 3 or 5 minute window where I'm laying there going, now, did that wake him up? And we're going to ride across the river and get more liquor, or will he go on back to sleep? And after about 5 minutes, if I didn't hear nothing else, I went on back to sleep. But every once in a while, he'd be like, hey, come on, let's take a ride. Okay, here we go. But yeah, him coughing during the night, I remember that. Oh God, I remember.
Hang on, I'm texting singing superstar sensation Jelly Roll. Do you have an idea for a song about Daddy's coffin that might mean a trip to the bootlegger? Because I got a story for you. And Sam.
Yeah. The other part about sounds like that, and it's the outdoor sounds, is we had a garden, and gosh, no, y'all know how I feel about a garden. But we'd pick all the beans and all that stuff. And normally, neighbors would come over, and or if you're sitting out there and you're shelling beans or breaking beans and doing whatever, if somebody was driving by as a neighbor, they'd pull in and they would get a chair and sit down and start doing it. And it would always be sort of later in the afternoon, and so the sun would start going down, and then you start hearing the sounds, and all of a sudden the sun's gone. If there's no moon out, it's dark. We don't have any lights on outside. And all you can see is the fiery tip of everybody's cigarette around you, and everybody's talking, and we're snapping beans and whatever, and you're hearing the outside sounds of the crickets and stuff. And that was always pretty good.
It's those, it's funny how those memories kind of, like, I have similar memories of being a kid spending the summer visiting my grandparents, and they'd be sitting out in the backyard in their little Sears screen house. Remember those? You could buy them at Sears and pop them up like a little screen.
I mean, if you had money, you could live like that. But I mean, okay.
And they'd be out there, and you could see the tips of their cigarettes, and you could hear their laughter and their voices kind of floating across the yard, but you couldn't make out the words necessarily. It was just such a safe feeling, right? You're a kid, you've been playing all day, you've had your bath. There's a certain feeling that comes from getting out of the shower or the bath and putting on your jammies and going to bed and listening to that kind of a sound. It's such a safe, clean, protective feeling. Like those were the good times for me in childhood, because we moved so much. I don't have one signature sound that I really remember. And the ones that really stand out for me, like, for example, in the winters when I was a kid out west, we lived in a valley. And we lived in a small town at one end of the valley, and we lived on our little rental house was right on the reservoir which would freeze solid in the wintertime. And about 5 miles up the road was an enormous elk preserve. And the elk would come down from the high country in the winter months when there wasn't much to eat, and state fish and game would feed them. So you could drive by, it's still there. You can go right now if you want to, but you could drive by this elk preserve, Lamar, and there would be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of elk just feeding. Wow. And people from other places, like you always knew when you were seeing strangers because they would pull their cars over and just be bug-eyed at the sight of so many elk. And sometimes they would start bugling. I mean, it was just really wonderful. But nature is in balance, but it can seem very harsh to humans because in the coldest, deadest parts of winter, the wolves and coyotes have to eat too. And they would go into that elk preserve and they would separate the weak and the sick and the old, and they would chase them down to the reservoir, and then they would eat them. And so one sound that's really like I can close my eyes and I'm right back there is the sound of the coyotes calling each other. Thank God I couldn't hear the poor miserable elk. And if you're going, oh my God, your stories, your childhood, if you think it's tough to listen to, you should try being inside this head. Okay, you should try having been there. You think I don't want to be like the other boys and girls? I most certainly do. But then when we moved back east, it was a completely different soundscape. Living in like a major city with the, traffic noises and people talking and walking on the sidewalks all hours of the night laughing. I lived across the street from a legendary Philly bar, like a legendary bar. And you knew it was about 4 a.m. when all the beer bottles hit the metal dumpster. So like there are all these sounds that take you right back to a specific time and place. But, we did a thing what sparked this? We did a thing on the radio show about smells that are disappearing from the world, right? Yeah. Well, if you think about it, there are certain sounds that are kind of disappearing from the world. The sound of dial-up internet, the sound of a rotary phone being dialed. Yes, I know some people still have dial-up, and I know some people still have a rotary phone. Some people also have horse and buggy.
Well, it must be nice to have Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Do they still have dial-up?
I think it's out there. Yeah. I think it's out there. And there are people with rotary phones and think about all of the kinds of noises that are disappearing.
They do still, but AOL still has dial-up.
Yeah. There are parts of the country where there just isn't broadband or 5G or whatever. And you can't cling to the past and be sad that these things are disappearing. But you can acknowledge that they're disappearing.
Yeah.
Are you okay? Do you need some water? I would bring some.
I'm drinking some. I'm a week out of that weird sore throat where I thought I had the mumps. And then Lamar told me my mumps could fall and make my groin swell, and that was very panicky. My doctor's reaction to that news, Lamar.
For you, yes, I bet that would be panic.
Did he warn you also like I did?
Oh
did he
my God,
warn
my
you
doctor's
of the dangers
reaction
of the dropping mumps? I mean, come on.
My doctor, he's so precious. He's from India and he has the most beautiful, his accent is it's like he's singing when he talks. It's very musical. And he said, I have to usually force you to come in every 2 years. Why are you back? And I said, I've got a kenkle neck and my throat hurts. It feels like razor blades. And what if I have mumps? And Lamar, who I work with, told me if my mumps fall, I'll have swelling in my groin. And he sat there for a minute and he said, Cheryl,
I am so sorry I didn't get a chance to witness this personally.
Cheryl, where do you find these information? Well, Lamar grew up in the country in Georgia, and his mother, he said, is your coworker a medical man? No, he's not a medical man. He's a radio personality. Mm. So the good news was I don't have mumps that are falling or remaining stationary.
Well, that's good. That's good.
And then we finished all of that, and he goes, Gerald, did you follow my referral to see a therapist? Oh, no, sir. I've been busy. I was out west with my mom. Yeah.
What was it you said to him where he went, I think this one needs a referral for that?
Oh, I was I've just had so much stress and so much anxiety. And so he was like, I really want you to talk to someone. I'm like, all I do is talk. Talking is the only thing I do. I want to talk less is my problem. I just adore him. He's the sweetest man. So anyway, back to these sounds. If we all just could sit and quiet our brains and think about it, like all of our lives have this little soundtrack. And I'm always envious of people that grew up in one place like you did and have a hometown, and that you can close your eyes and there's a whole universe of smells and sounds and sights that mean home to you. It's different when you're nomadic like my people were. Because I guess you could say the bright side is I feel at home in a lot of places.
Yeah.
But I don't have what you have. I don't have the sound of cows, the sound of Daddy's coughing as he's drinking his liquor. What did that sound like? Can you do that? Can you impersonate your dad?
I had a Chevy Chevette. That's what it sounded like when you tried to start it up on a cold morning.
It was a lot like that.
Lamar, I mean, at that point, you're up. Why not go to the bootlegger? It's not like you're going to be able to sleep through that.
Yeah. That was usually followed if Fritz the dachshund was in there looking at it, that usually followed by, oh, Fitcher. Oh, Fitch, you're the only friend I got, Fisher. You're the only friend I got, Fisher. Oh, you're the only one.
Aw, this is such a sweet episode. The sounds of home.
Oh man.
Well, so if as you're listening to this, if you're thinking, oh yeah, there's this one distinctive, yeah, you can shoot us a talkback on our app. There's a little cartoon microphone in the bottom center of the screen. It's teeny tiny. Just tap it and talk. The app will do all the work, or you can call us at 844-52-SHERI. But I want to share something a listener told me once a long time ago that I'm never, ever, ever going to forget. And Max, I think when I say this, you'll remember it too. Folks, her family lived next to a factory. And what the factory did was they ground up bones to make dog food.
That's right.
And the sound of her childhood was the sound and smell of bones getting ground up. And if you wouldn't rather listen to Lamar's dad talk to Fritzy the dachshund, that's it for today's episode of the Oddcast. Join us on Friday for Talking Lamar. And don't forget, of course, the multi-nominated and even occasionally award-winning True Weird Stuff, with a new episode for you on Friday. Our website is BOBANDSHERI.com. We surely do appreciate your listening, because you're the reason we make it. Otherwise, we would be 4 grown-ass adults talking to ourselves in a room. And that'll get you locked up somewhere with no sharp objects or shoelaces, okay? So we're glad to know you're out there. We'll see you on the next Oddcast.